What's going on YouTube, and welcome back to the GlowShift Gauges YouTube channel. If you're new here, what this series is all about, we bought a 2017 Mustang GT, ordered some parts for it. Episode 2, we already installed the headers and full exhaust on it, and now we're about to dive into the supercharger.
What we're gonna do first is disconnect the battery, drain the coolant, take the front bumper off, and then get some of this other stuff out of the way, like the actual intake, the upper intake manifold, make it so we can start prepping to drop the supercharger in. All that room. 66 pages on this thing, not including our 10 rig kit, which is another 8 on just how to put a belt on.
How long is this gonna take?
Without any issues, we should be able to get this whole job done in 2 days. But we're gonna be adding in an oil gear. These ones that come from the factory, they're plastic or nylon or something. They strip out real easily anytime you add boost or anything to it. So we're switching it out with a billet gear, which means we gotta take the whole front of the motor apart, take timing chains off, get the oil pump out, switch out the gear, and then get back on track. So that's gonna delay us a little bit. We're gonna lift the car up so we can get the pan under it and drain the coolant out. Look at that, it came down. Whew.
30 screws and 15 pop pins later.
Yep. Got him. So much for making a mess.
You mean not making a mess?
We'll clean it up.
Now what?
I think we're ready to take the front bumper off, so we're gonna check the instructions and see what it recommends.
Does it say anything about spilling the coolant all over the ground? Because we did that.
It says remove the vent, which I did. It says use a 3/8 inside diameter hose at the end of the petcock for a cleaner procedure. We didn't do that. It's alright, we're good. Typical drift car.
Sounds like a drift car already, so. All right, the front bumper is off. When we actually go to put it back on, we're gonna get the new grill for here. That's the emblem delete and has the lights on the bottom of it. And it's gonna have a new lip that goes on there. So before we put it back on, we'll put those things on and then put the bumper back on at the very end.
Weight reduction.
The bumper didn't weigh that much.
Alright, now that the bumper's off, we're going to continue to remove the little pieces off the engine. We have a couple vacuum lines and some breather lines that are coming off next. And then some other brackets, evap solenoids. Basically prepping to pull that intake manifold off. So we'll get going on all that stuff. We're taking off something with importance. to the instructions, it looks like we got most of the radiator lines and coolant hoses and all that stuff out of the way. We're going to start now taking off the fuel rail and the intake manifold itself. So it looks like all this is getting ready to come out next. So we'll start working on all that. Okay. Still pretty clean in there. Guess that's what you get for 2,000 miles. Because we're not installing the supercharger right yet today, we're going to clean up the runners and tape them up so nothing goes down into the engine. And then we're going to proceed to take the front of the engine apart in order to change out the oil gear. We did talk about that a little earlier, being kind of necessary anytime you do any type of high power. We're going to go ahead and do that first before we have any problems. All right, there's more coolant in there. All right, so we're done for today. We ended up taking the whole top of the motor off, got all the coolant lines out, the water pump, we took the alternator out of the way, we got the valve covers off, the intake, the actual intake plenum is completely out. Tomorrow, we're gonna continue heading towards the oil gear. So we're gonna take the actual dampener off, we're gonna take the timing covers off, timing chains out, replace the gear, and just start putting it all back together, and hopefully we get done.
Think we'll get it all done in one day tomorrow?
It'll be pushing if we get it done tomorrow. I'd like to, but I think we still got 2 more days ahead of us before we continue back on our supercharger build.
Sounds good.
Going on, we're day 2 of our Mustang S550 supercharged build. What we're going to do is we're going to start today by taking off the stock balancer, removing the timing cover, that way we can replace that oil gear. It's one of the biggest failure points in this motor when you start adding some power to it. So we're going to get that done and hopefully get everything swapped out and start dropping some stuff on today. We were trying to figure out how to get this AC serpentine belt off. It's real tight. There's no tensioner, there's no adjustments that we can see. So we decided to look it up in the Ford manual, and as per the manual it says the stretch fit belt, got it, which means we can't reuse it. So we did go ahead and order a new one of those. So here we go. Belt removed. That was definitely tight. Harmonic balancer bolts, the one-time use, so this thing's now trash. We're going to get a new one. Balancer removed. All right, so what I'm going to do next is we're going to drain the oil out of the engine, and I have 4 bolts on the front of the oil pan that has to come out, and then we'll take out all these other bolts so we can pop the timing cover off. We'll align all the timing marks, take off the right chain first, move it, take off the left chain, and pop out the oil gear and get that swapped out. Alright, so there's different size bolts and different size heads and stuff on this timing cover, so I'm going to make a little diagram so that I can keep track of everything for when I go to put it back together. Alright, timing cover. So this now get this to about 5 o'clock. Right about there. Here's the crank sprocket. Apparently this is pretty fragile and everything else as well, so we got a new one of these just as a precaution so we don't have to do this all over again. This is what we got. It should spin pretty freely in here, which it does. We're pretty good in there. All right, so there's 2 flat spots on this inner gear, and they have to match up with these flat spots here on the crank. So we're gonna get it pretty close, and then wiggle it on there. There it goes, look at that. Like it's meant to be there. 19, 18. The second bolt is 18 foot-pounds. Alright, so we're torqued, and now we'll go back and redo torque angle. Alright, 60. So we're all torqued, the angle's done. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put the new Sprocket gear on, which we're also replacing and upgrading just to make sure that it doesn't break in the future. Put our timing chains on and get ready to put the cover back on. That. That mark here. Technically. Pay attention now. As per the instructions, we got to turn this crank approximately 1 3/4 turns in order to get the keyway back up to 12. So we have to pass, we get to 12, well, come all the way around one time back down to 5 o'clock, and then rotate it the rest of the way up to 12 o'clock in order to be in time for the other side. $12 o'clock. Well, timing chains are back on. That's a good thing. All right, start her up. Missing a few steps. Before we go and put the valve covers back on, I noticed that there's a lot of space that we can actually get to the hole in the firewall that we had created when we pulled out that sound tube. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna loosely run all the wire harnesses that we need to run the boost gauge, the fuel pressure gauge, the oil pressure gauge. We already have the wideband wires ran through there. So we'll get all that stuff ran through there now. We're actually also going to put the oil pressure sensor and adapter in down here because it's right behind the octane and there's a lot more room to get to it from here. So we're going to go ahead and do all that before we go and put this stuff back together. Once we get those wires loosely ran up and through the factory harnesses, we'll then go ahead and put the valve covers back on. Here we have our GlowShift Ford 5.0 oil pressure adapter. It's meant to be able to thread the factory sensor into it as well as put our sensor in and keep it in the factory location so you don't trip any check engine lights. So we're gonna what we're actually gonna do is we're gonna run this right up with this other harness that's right here and back towards the firewall just so that we stay away from anything that's hot, like the headers or anything that's moving, like the belt or anything like that. So our fuel pressure sensor is going to go somewhere right here along the rail. So we'll put the harness plug somewhere in here with enough slack so we can run it and make it look nice. But this is just so we can get it through the firewall anyway, so we can make adjustments later on. Plenty of wire to go either direction. So when you're working with the boost line, as you can see it's a rubber line, it's coiled up pretty tight. You want to kind of uncoil the whole thing and press on anything that might have had like a little kink in it just to make sure that it's not sticking or caught up on anything. Make it as pliable as possible, that way you don't have any type of, like see right here, there's a little kink right there. You want to just make sure that's open so that there's no like issues with the gauge reading later on. So we have all the harnesses ran through. We got the wire harnesses all kind of wire tied here to the factory stuff. So we should be in a pretty good place with all of that. We have new gaskets, so we're gonna replace them. So we'll just match up which one's supposed to be where. There we go with that valve cover. Off to the next one. So we have the valve covers on. We swapped out that oil drive gear. We switched out the crank sprocket, timed the engine. Looks like we're ready to continue with the supercharger install.
All right, that's it for episode 3. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We don't want you to miss out on any of the action, especially since on the next episode, we're gonna be dropping the supercharger on this motor finally and hopefully being able to get it started. So, we'll see you on the next one.
front tail. Lower plug is the power wire. Once these are all plugged in and secured, tuck this wire in here.
Get this thing fired up, get it warmed up, make sure we have no leaks or problems like that. All right, let's see what we got.